Chained for 5 years, a German shepherd longed for love, until one woman set him free. For 5 long years he had been a prisoner, not behind bars, but bound by something far crueler. A heavy, rusted chain that clung to his neck like a shackle, stripping him of freedom, dignity, and hope. The world had forgotten him, but he had not forgotten the world. Even through his suffering, a tiny flicker of longing remained in his heart. He had once dreamed of love, of running freely across open fields, of feeling the warmth of a gentle touch. But dreams had no place in his reality. His world was small, cold, and unchanging. A patch of dirt, a rotten wooden crate, and the unyielding weight of neglect. Through the cracks in the fence, he had seen other dogs, happy, loved, running beside their owners with tails wagging and tongues hanging loose in joy. He had heard laughter, felt the echoes of kindness that never reached him. Was he not worthy of love? Had he done something wrong? The answers never came. Only the silence of his isolation spoke to him, whispering that this was all he would ever know. Until one day, everything changed. Once he had been full of life. He had been born into this world just like any other pup. Curious, energetic, eager to love and be loved. His breed was one of strength and loyalty, but he had never been given a chance to be either. No name had been lovingly called to him. No soft voice had reassured him when he was scared. From the moment he was old enough to walk, a chain had taken the place of a caring hand. He grew, but not in the way he should have. His muscles never developed properly. His fur lost its shine, and his eyes, once filled with the innocent wonder of a young pup, became dull, burdened with a pain no creature should endure. He was neither wild nor free, neither protected nor loved. He simply existed, tethered to the same spot, waiting for something he no longer believed would ever come. The backyard was his prison, a desolate patch of land stripped of warmth or comfort. The chain around his neck was short, too short to allow him more than a few steps in any direction. Rain or shine, summer or winter, he had no escape. There was no soft bed to lie on, no sturdy shelter to shield him from the elements. The wooden crate that had once served as a doghouse was falling apart, barely standing against the wind and rain. He had no clean water, only a filthy bowl that was often left empty. His food was thrown at him carelessly, stale, rotten, barely enough to keep him alive. Hunger was a constant ache in his stomach, thirst a never-ending torment. But worse than the physical suffering was the loneliness. In the beginning, he had barked, cried, tried to get the attention of anyone passing by. He had wagged his tail, hoping for a moment of kindness. But no one ever came. Over time, he learned that his voice didn't matter. His cries turned into silence. His hope faded into nothingness. Years of neglect had left their mark. His body, once meant to be strong, had grown weak from lack of exercise. His paws were cracked from standing on the same rough ground, his legs stiff from disuse. The chain had worn deep wounds into his neck, raw and infected from years of friction. But the worst wounds were the ones unseen, the ones carved into his heart. He had once believed in love, in warmth, in the goodness of people. Now, he no longer knew if such things were real. He had been starved not just of food but of kindness, of companionship, of the simple joy of being alive. And yet, deep inside him, something still remained. A whisper of hope, buried beneath the years of suffering. He didn't know it, but his life was about to change. Someone had finally seen him. Someone was coming. Someone who would set him free. For 5 long years, no one had stopped. No one had looked past the rusted fence or paid attention to the broken creature suffering in silence. He had become part of the background, a forgotten soul lost in the shadows of neglect. But then, one day, everything changed. She wasn't looking for him. She hadn't set out that morning expecting to find a life hanging by a thread. But fate had other plans. As she passed by the old house, something made her pause. At first, it was just a feeling, an unease, a sense that something was deeply wrong. Then, her eyes fell upon him. What she saw shattered her heart. A German shepherd, once majestic and proud, now reduced to a frail shell of himself. His ribs pressed against his skin, His fur was patchy and dull, and his neck. She had to look away for a moment before she could process the sight of the deep, raw wound where the chain had dug in. But what broke her most of all were his eyes. They weren't just sad. They were empty, as if he had already given up. But she hadn't. Her name was Amelia, a woman with a heart too big to ignore suffering when she saw it. She had always been drawn to animals, always felt their unspoken pain in ways others often overlooked. She had rescued before. Cats abandoned on the streets, dogs left to fend for themselves. But this was different. This was not just neglect. This was cruelty. She couldn't just walk away. Every instinct in her screamed that if she left now, if she turned her back, he wouldn't survive much longer. But freeing him wouldn't be easy. The chain around his neck wasn't just physical. It was a symbol of 5 years of neglect, of a life stolen from him. And the people who had put him there wouldn't let him go without a fight. Amelia's first instinct was to go straight to the front door, to demand answers, to take him away right then and there. But when the door creaked open, the man who stood before her reeked of indifference. He leaned lazily against the doorframe, eyeing her with disinterest as she spoke. "The dog in your yard, he's suffering. He needs help." The man shrugged. "He's just a dog. He's fine." Fine? The deep wound on his neck, the starvation in his body, the hollow emptiness in his gaze. None of it was fine. Amelia clenched her fists, her heart pounding in frustration. She tried reasoning, explaining, even offering to take the dog off his hands. But the man barely listened. "He ain't going nowhere. Not unless you got money." Money. The only thing he seemed to care about. Amelia felt sick, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't leaving without that dog. If money was what it took to buy his freedom, then so be it. She reached for her wallet, her hands trembling, and when the deal was made, she ran to him. For the first time in 5 years, he felt a gentle touch, a whisper of kindness, a promise that everything was about to change. But what Amelia didn't yet realize was that the battle wasn't over. The hardest part was still to come. Freedom didn't come with an instant happy ending. After 5 years of suffering, his body was fragile, his spirit even more so. He didn't understand what was happening when Amelia unlatched the chain from his neck. He didn't rush forward in joy. He didn't wag his tail. He simply stood there, as if waiting for the weight to return, as if he couldn't believe this wasn't another cruel trick. But it wasn't a trick. For the first time in years, he was no longer bound to suffering. He was no longer alone. Yet, the road ahead would be long and uncertain. He had never known love, only hunger, pain, and isolation. Could he truly learn to trust again? Could he heal not just in body, but in heart? Amelia was determined to find out. The moment they arrived at the vet's office, Amelia felt the weight of just how much work lay ahead. Under the bright clinic lights, the full extent of his suffering became heartbreakingly clear. The deep wound around his neck, raw from years of rubbing against metal, was severely infected. His ribs jutted out sharply, his fur was matted and thin, and his muscles were weak from standing in one spot for too long. The vet ran gentle hands over his frail body, murmuring soft reassurances, but he remained still, too tired to react, too broken to resist. "He's malnourished, dehydrated, and in critical need of medical care," the vet explained. "But the real challenge will be his emotional recovery. He's been neglected for so long. It's possible he's forgotten what kindness feels like." Those words hit Amelia harder than she expected. She had saved his life, but what if he had already given up on living? What if love wasn't enough to heal him? She pushed the doubt aside. He had spent 5 years fighting to survive. She wouldn't give up on him now. The treatment process began immediately. Antibiotics for his infection, a special diet to strengthen his frail body, and tests to assess the extent of his internal damage. The road ahead would be slow and filled with setbacks, but for the first time he had a chance. His body wasn't the only thing that had suffered, his heart had, too. Years of neglect had left scars deeper than any wound. He didn't know what to make of the soft bed Amelia laid out for him, the fresh bowl of food placed at his feet. He flinched at the sound of her voice, too used to harsh words and indifference. When she reached out to pet him, he shrank back, his body stiff with fear. He had been hurt before. He had learned that human hands could be cruel. Could he unlearn it? Could he believe in kindness again? Amelia didn't push him. She gave him space, letting him adjust at his own pace. She spoke to him in gentle tones, sat beside him without touching, allowing him to realize that not all humans meant harm. The breakthrough came not in a grand moment, but in the smallest gesture. One night, as she sat nearby, he hesitantly laid his head on the edge of her lap. It was tentative, uncertain, but it was a step. The first sign that maybe he wanted to believe in love again. Days turned into weeks, and slowly he began to change. His once dull eyes started to show hints of life. His body grew stronger, his fur regained its shine. But the greatest change was in his spirit. He no longer flinched at Amelia's touch. He no longer cowered at sudden sounds. The first time he wagged his tail, it was barely noticeable. A small flicker of movement, hesitant but real. And then came the moment Amelia had been waiting for. The first time he ran. It happened in the park, where she had taken him for a quiet afternoon walk. At first, he moved cautiously, unsure of the open space, of the grass beneath his paws. Then, something shifted. As if a forgotten memory resurfaced, he bolted forward, his legs carrying him in a full sprint, ears flapping, tail wagging wildly. For the first time in his life, he was running. Not from fear, not from pain, but from joy. Tears welled in Amelia's eyes as she watched. The broken, forgotten dog she had rescued was gone. In his place stood a soul reborn. A survivor, a fighter, a dog who had learned to love again. But perhaps the greatest transformation wasn't just in him. It was in her, too. He had taught her something invaluable. That even in the darkest of places, even after years of suffering, the light of hope could still shine through. And sometimes all it took was one person willing to see, to care, and to fight for a life that others had left behind. The shackles of his past had been broken, but the scars remained, not just on his body, but in the depths of his soul. He had spent 5 long years knowing nothing but suffering, isolation, and pain. Now, for the first time in his life, he was free. But freedom, as beautiful as it was, also came with uncertainty. Would he ever truly heal? Would he ever know what it meant to be loved? Not just for a fleeting moment, but forever? For Amelia, the answer was clear from the start. The day she freed him from those chains wasn't just the day his life changed. It was the day her life changed, too. She had saved many animals before, but there was something different about him. Something unspoken. As if, in his quiet, broken gaze, he had already chosen her as much as she had chosen him. At first, the plan had been simple. Rescue, rehabilitate, and rehome. It was what Amelia had done for so many others before him. She would nurse him back to health, help him trust again, and then find him a family worthy of his love. But deep down, she knew. The way he followed her, hesitant but hopeful. The way his tired eyes softened when she spoke. The way, after weeks of silence, he let out a content sigh when she laid a warm blanket over him one night. He had already found his home, he just didn't know it yet. The rescue center received inquiries. Kind families hoping to adopt a dog who had survived so much. But Amelia couldn't bring herself to let him go. He had spent years being discarded, abandoned, left behind. She refused to be another name on that list. The day she signed the adoption papers, making him officially hers, she knelt down beside him and whispered, "You're home now, forever." And for the first time, as if he finally understood, he leaned into her embrace. A new life didn't happen overnight. It was a journey, one that required patience, understanding, and above all, love. But day by day he transformed. The once starved, skeletal figure now had a healthy coat, his ribs no longer visible, his wounds healing with time and care. His posture, once stiff and guarded, began to relax. His eyes, once lifeless, began to shine. The world was a mystery to him, one he had never been given the chance to explore. The softness of a real bed beneath him, the warmth of a home filled with laughter, the simple pleasure of running without restraint. The first time Amelia took him to the park, he stood still for a moment, as if unsure of what to do with all the open space before him. Then, with a deep breath, he took off. He ran, fast and free, his ears flapping in the wind, his tail wagging with pure, unfiltered joy. Amelia could hardly believe it. This was the same dog who once stood motionless, too afraid to move. Now he was running toward life, toward happiness, toward a future that was finally his to claim. He learned to play, to trust, to love. He learned that hands could bring affection, not harm. That words could be soft, not cruel. That people could stay, not leave. But what Amelia hadn't expected was just how much he would give in return. Every time she came home, he was there, greeting her with eyes full of gratitude. Every time she felt lost or overwhelmed, he rested his head on her lap, as if to remind her that love heals in both directions. She had saved him, but in a way he had saved her, too. And then, one night, something happened that would stay in Amelia's heart forever. As she lay on the couch, exhausted after a long day, she felt a weight settle beside her. He had climbed up, something he had never done before. He hesitated only for a second before gently resting his head against her chest, closing his eyes. Amelia held her breath, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell had made him trust her so completely in that moment. She stroked his fur, whispering, "You're safe now." His tail wagged, slow and steady, and in that instant she knew he believed her. His story isn't just his own. It belongs to the countless animals still out there, chained to a life of neglect, waiting for someone to see them, to care, to fight for them. He was just one dog, one among many. But to Amelia, he was everything. How many others are still waiting? How many souls are out there, longing for a touch that doesn't hurt, a voice that doesn't scold, a home that doesn't disappear? This isn't just a story. It's a call to action. A reminder that rescue doesn't just change one life. It changes two. The one who is saved, and the one who chooses to save. Because sometimes, the greatest transformations don't happen in a single moment. They happen in quiet, patient love, in the spaces between fear and trust, in the gentle realization that life, no matter how broken, is always worth saving. And maybe, just maybe, there's an animal out there waiting for you to be their Amelia. Waiting for their chains, whether physical or emotional, to finally be broken. Because love doesn't just heal, it sets free. His journey was never just about breaking free from chains. It was about rediscovering the life he was always meant to have. The road had been long, filled with pain, uncertainty, and fear. But in the end, love had won. A dog who had once known nothing but cruelty now woke up every morning in a home filled with warmth, kindness, and the unwavering promise that he would never be abandoned again. His story is a testament to the resilience of the soul, both human and animal. It proves that no matter how broken, no matter how lost, no matter how forgotten, there is always hope. That even after years of suffering, life can still offer second chances. Looking back, it's hard to believe how much had changed. The trembling, malnourished dog that had once cowered in the dirt was now full of life, running freely, trusting deeply, loving without fear. His transformation wasn't just physical, it was emotional, even spiritual. For Amelia, he was more than just a rescue. He was a reminder of why she did what she did. A reminder that no act of kindness is ever too small, that no soul is ever too lost. She had taken a chance on him, but in doing so, she had been given something priceless in return. A bond unbreakable, a love unshakable. But his story doesn't end here. Because for every happy ending, there are still countless others waiting for theirs. Right now, as you hear his story, there is another animal out there, chained, abandoned, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to fight for them. Not everyone can rescue, not everyone can adopt, but everyone can make a difference. Whether it's speaking up for those who have no voice, supporting shelters, fostering, or simply spreading awareness. Every action matters. Because sometimes all it takes is one person to see beyond the fear, beyond the scars. One person to say, "You are worth saving," and maybe that person could be you.